Young people without the safety net of a stable family have to rely on help from the state or from the community. But as many of these young people become adults, including some with criminal histories, the safety net breaks off. And that can lead to a number of problems, including homelessness. A forum about the needs of these young people was recently held by the Massachusetts Task Force on Youth Aging Out of State Care and the Boston College Graduate School of Social Work. Joining us are two members of the task force, the co-chair, Moussaides, and from the Home for Little Wanderers, the Director of Business and Strategies, Renee Yourk. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start with Moussaides. Talk about the different kinds of young people you're concerned with here.
Sure. The sort of children who are aging out of care are children who were taken into the custody of the Child Protective Service Agency, either because of abuse or neglect. And for a variety of reasons, they are reaching the age of 14 and above. And under state and federal rules, the state can only continue to perform services to them up to age 22. And so the challenge here is, how do you prepare a child who is most likely to have to live independently because they have lost contact with their families, and we have not been able to produce a new family for them in the period of time that they were in the state's custody.
Given that many of these young people have lived with a fair amount of disruption in their lives, I guess it's more likely that by the time they're 18, maybe they haven't quite gotten as far with things like education as other young people have. So I guess they do need more intervention.
Sure. These are children who, for the most part, have experienced some form of trauma. And I like to refer to it as they're starting their life oftentimes without the full toolbox. So education, an ability, they've also, because they've been in care, is likely to have their education disrupted because they've been in multiple schools and multiple settings, multiple foster homes. And so, you know, these are very resilient young adults, but young adults nonetheless who we want to ensure that they have a full toolbox by the time they leave state care.
Renee, you're with the Home for Little Wanderers. You have a project called Roxbury Village, and I guess the idea here is to extend the safety net, but also help young people move beyond it.
Yes, absolutely. This program was opened about a year ago. It was born out of a need. We, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we never served kids beyond 18. We weren't licensed to do so. So when they turned 18, we could no longer serve them, but they kept coming back around. They needed more support. They needed more advice. They needed more structure. They needed a positive adult in their life just to bounce ideas off, get advice from. So we decided to come up, develop this project and got it funded in a very unique way, because there isn't a lot of funding out there for over 18. And we opened it up a year ago, and it's for young people, men and women, young men and women, 18 plus. They live in a safe environment. It's a brand new triple decker in Roxbury. It was completely renovated. They live with us, and they get life coaching services. So a life coach works with them one-on-one to talk about what are their strengths, what are their needs, what's their plan, and they really develop a life plan for them and the steps of what they need to do to fulfill their life plan.
I know this has been up and running for only 1 year, but is there any sense you have about whether this is working, if it's moving in the right direction?
I think it is. Most of the kids have a job or enrolled in some type of educational program, vocational or 2-year or 4-year college. And I just learned today that one of our first residents is actually moving out on his own, which we think he has a job that can sustain himself on his own, and we think that's we're definitely in the positive direction.
Maria Moussaides, because the other end of the spectrum here is what happens when the young people age out and they don't have something like this.
I think that what we know from the studies that the Home for Little Wanderers and Cambridge Family and Children's Service held is that there's the possibility of very bad outcomes. Homelessness, depression, suicidal attempts. Many of these young adults end up in the prison system. And I think, as Renee said, housing becomes a critical piece, because if a young adult doesn't have a place to live, then we are not able to provide them with the wraparound services that they need to succeed. I think what we know from the Massachusetts study and a more recent study at the University of Chicago is that you can get positive outcomes for this population, but only if they have a broad range of services that enable them to be supported through their early years of independence.
I'm coming back to Renee, if you were to give some advice about things that we need to see more of, what would you like to see in the mix here?
More of this type of programming.
Right.
I just want to give an example. So we have 8 beds in that program. Our first 2 weeks after it opened, we had 150 calls for it. So, and we have a huge waiting list, constantly getting additional calls to people looking for resources for these clients. So we need to have more of these larger scale of these programs, and we're looking into that. And there are a few other providers in the state doing it, but we need a lot more. About 250 to 300 youth age out of our state's care every quarter. And I just looked at the most recent statistics, and the last quarter that they have the data for, the average time in placement, meaning living away from their family, was 3.3 years. That was a median, not average, median, so half of them are even higher than that. And the median number of placements, 8. So they've lived in 8 different places. This is at an age where they're trying to finish high school, they're trying to think about career options, they're going through puberty. Just think about how that disrupts and what at 18 or maybe even 22 when they're aging out of the system, what they've been through and how could they actually be ready to live on their own. So we need a lot more larger scale projects like this.
Maria Moussaides, talk about what you've been doing in Cambridge and what can be learned from that about what we need to see more of.
One of the things that we've been doing, or actually 2 things that we've been doing, one is making sure that every young adult who's sort of leaving state care is connected to another caring adult. So we have been both reaching out to find kin who may have lost connections with that young adult, but also through our mentoring program, we have made sure that every young adult has a lifelong connection. And in addition to that, we recently launched a program with some grant money to create a transitions advisor. So just as in the case with Roxbury Village, we have an individual person who is working with that young adult to prepare a transition plan for their life. Making sure that they have the life skills, that they have bank accounts, social security card, everything that they need so that when they leave our care, that they have an ability to be able to sustain themselves both financially as well as emotionally.
Is the problem here that young people might find it difficult to approach that kind of a person and get them into their life, or is it that it really takes some outside force to push someone in to pick up the ball in that?
I think that if you've spent a good chunk of your life or your teenage years in state care, that you sort of, you lose some hope in that process. And what we're trying to sort of explain to these children is that they can be successful in their life, and that we are going to help them to do that. You can imagine living in a city like Boston, how expensive it is to rent an apartment. So if you are making minimum wage, or if you've got a part-time job and are still trying to complete your education, it is virtually impossible, no matter how hard you work, to be able to live on your own. And I think that what we know is that young adults today, a great many people, children who are not in care, come back and live with their parents until age 25. And for this population, they don't have that family, for the most part, to move back with. So I think it's really nonprofit agencies like ourselves that are moving in to sort of fill this gap until these young adults are ready to launch themselves into a successful adulthood.
Renee, what about the ability just to be in a place like Boston? Because there are, I guess, young people who do have some kind of relatives who live in the city, plus there are all these opportunities, job opportunities, education. I guess if you can't live in the city, a lot of that becomes much more difficult.
It does. We actually try to keep them in their home communities because there are some connections. You know, families, extended families, friends, familiar stores, you know, places to hang out. So we try to keep them in the community. So a lot of our work with housing post discharge from our program is they really, you know, most likely will have to have roommates and whatnot, and we work with them on how you can cohabit with another individual, what are the rules, the regulations, the respect you should have, how you select a roommate, how you approach a landlord, first and last month's rent. So we teach them all those skills as well. But we do try to keep them in their communities because sending them out to an unfamiliar community isn't, you know, we really want that wraparound support of the community.
Thank you both, Renee Yourk and Maria Moussaides.